Every morning, before the world tells you who to be, there's a quiet moment where your nervous system is listening. In that space, you are not your deadlines, not your past, not your roles. You are simply a human being waking up to another day. What you do in the first 20 minutes matters more than you think. Most people reach for their phones. They enter comparison, urgency, and subtle threat. The body tightens, the breath shortens, the mind prepares for battle, and we call this normal. But what if transformation is not about adding more discipline, more productivity, more pressure? What if it begins with safety? The practice is simple. Pause and turn inward. Before you speak to anyone, before you consume anything, sit upright. Place a hand on your chest. Feel your breath without trying to control it. Ask yourself gently, what is here this morning? Not what should be here, not what you wish were here, just what is true. Maybe there is anxiety, maybe there is heaviness, maybe there is hope. Whatever arises, meet it without judgment. The moment you stop fighting your inner experience, your body softens. And when the body softens, clarity emerges. Then ask a second question. What do I need today? Not what others expect, not what your image demands. What does your nervous system need to feel regulated? Perhaps it needs slowness. Perhaps it needs a difficult conversation. Perhaps it needs rest. This is not indulgence. It is responsibility. When you abandon yourself in the morning, you spend the rest of the day seeking validation, control, or distraction. But when you anchor into yourself first, you move through the world with intention rather than reaction. Changing your life is not about grand gestures. It is about daily self-connection. 5 minutes of conscious breathing. 5 minutes of honest self-inquiry. One clear intention rooted in authenticity. Over time, something shifts. You become less reactive. Boundaries become clearer. Your yes feels real. Your no carries less guilt. The outer chaos may remain, but the inner ground becomes steadier. And from that steadiness, real change grows. Do this every morning. Pause. Feel. Ask. Choose. It is a small ritual, but it returns you to yourself. And a life lived from self-connection is a life transformed. The first 20 minutes after you wake up are not neutral. They are biologically formative. In that fragile transition between sleep and wakefulness, your nervous system is especially impressionable, scanning for cues of safety or threat. Before your thinking mind fully comes online, your body is already interpreting the world. It is asking a silent question, is today safe? When you reach immediately for your phone, scroll through messages, headlines, and notifications, your system is flooded with stimulation before it has found its balance. The brain perceives urgency. The heart rate suddenly increases. Cortisol begins to rise. Even if the content seems harmless, the speed and unpredictability of input signal demand. The body prepares to respond before it has had a chance to settle. Over time, this repeated pattern wires a baseline of tension. You may not consciously feel anxious, but your physiology is braced. The nervous system does not distinguish sharply between physical threat and psychological pressure. An unanswered email can trigger the same stress pathways as a loud noise. A comparison on social media can register as social danger, which for humans has always meant potential exclusion. In those first moments of the day, when your regulatory capacity is still soft and forming, such signals carry amplified weight. By contrast, if the first 20 minutes are slow, predictable, and inwardly attentive, the body interprets that as safety. Safety is not a luxury state. It is the foundation of clarity, creativity, and emotional regulation. When you breathe deeply and deliberately upon waking, you stimulate the vagus nerve, encouraging a parasympathetic response. The heart steadies. Muscles release subtle tension. The mind becomes less scattered. This is not mystical. It is physiological. What many people misunderstand is that discipline alone cannot override a dysregulated nervous system. You can push yourself through the day, meet deadlines, perform efficiently, yet remain internally agitated. The cost appears later as irritability, exhaustion, or a vague sense of disconnection. The morning sets the tone not only for productivity, but for relational presence. If your system begins in alarm, you are more likely to react defensively, misinterpret neutral cues as critical, and struggle with patience. The first 20 minutes are an opportunity to establish internal leadership. Instead of allowing the external world to dictate your state, you become an active participant in shaping it, sitting quietly, noticing your breath, feeling the weight of your body against a bed or chair. These simple acts communicate to your nervous system that nothing immediate is attacking you. The absence of urgency becomes a powerful signal. From that place, intention emerges naturally rather than being forced. Over weeks and months, this small shift compounds. Neural pathways associated with calm awareness strengthen. The threshold for stress increases. You become less susceptible to emotional contagion from others. It is not that life becomes easier, it is that your internal environment becomes more resilient. The body learns, through repetition, that mornings begin with grounding rather than alarm. In this way, the first 20 minutes are not just a routine, they are a daily rehearsal of how you will inhabit your life. The impulse to reach outward the moment you wake up is deeply conditioned. Before your feet touch the floor, your hand searches for the phone, for messages, for updates, for evidence that the world is already in motion. It feels efficient, responsible, even necessary. Yet what often goes unnoticed is the cost. When you allow external input to enter before you've checked in with yourself, you surrender authorship of your internal state. In the first moments of the day, your mind is suggestible and your nervous system is still reorganizing from sleep. You are in a threshold state, neither fully unconscious nor fully engaged. This is precisely when the brain is most sensitive to cues. When those cues come from news alerts, social media, or urgent emails, the body reacts instantly. Comparison, pressure, and subtle threats seep in before you've had the chance to notice how you actually feel. External input is rarely neutral. Even positive messages create stimulation. The brain must process, evaluate, and respond. This activates cognitive and emotional circuits that consume energy. If your first awareness is directed outward, your inner landscape becomes background noise. You may move through the morning without ever asking what is happening inside you. Over time, this pattern fosters a quiet self-abandonment. You become highly attuned to the environment and increasingly disconnected from your own signals. There is also a psychological consequence. When the day begins with other people as priorities, you unconsciously adopt them as your own. A demanding message can create urgency that overrides your initial calm. A piece of bad news can introduce anxiety that colors your perception of everything that follows. Because this happens so quickly it feels natural, inevitable, yet it is a learned habit. Stopping external input is not about rejecting the world. It is about sequencing. Internal awareness must come first. Before you consume information, pause long enough to sense your body. Notice the quality of your breath. Is it shallow or deep? Is there tightness in your chest or ease in your stomach? What emotion is present beneath the surface? These questions do not require dramatic introspection. They require simple attention. When you establish contact with yourself first, something subtle but powerful shifts. Instead of being pulled by the loudest signal, you respond from a grounded center. You may still read the same messages and face the same responsibilities, but your nervous system has already been acknowledged. That acknowledgement reduces reactivity. It increases choice. There is also a reclaiming of authority in this act. By choosing not to engage immediately with devices or demands, you communicate to yourself that your inner world matters. You become less dependent on external stimulation to feel oriented. Silence becomes tolerable, even nourishing. In a culture that prizes constant connectivity, creating a boundary at the start of the day can feel uncomfortable. You may notice restlessness or a reflexive urge to check what you are missing. But beneath that discomfort lies an opportunity. When you sit with yourself before the world intrudes, you build familiarity with your own internal rhythms. You learn that you can be present without immediate input. Over time, this simple practice reshapes your relationship with attention. Instead of scattering it outward at the first cue, you anchor it inward. And from that anchoring, engagement with the world becomes deliberate rather than automatic. To practice a non-judgmental self-check-in is to interrupt a habit that most people do not even realize they have. The habit is not self-reflection, it is self-evaluation. The moment a feeling arises, the mind labels it as good or bad, productive or weak, acceptable or embarrassing. Before you have truly felt what is present, you are already trying to correct it. This reflex may have once been protective, especially if you grew up in an environment where certain emotions were unwelcome. But as adults, this pattern often becomes a subtle form of self-rejection. A genuine self-check-in begins with curiosity rather than control. When you wake up or pause during the day, you ask a simple question: what is here right now? Not what should be here, not what would look better. Just what is actually present in your body and mind. Perhaps there is tension in your shoulders. Perhaps there is a low hum of anxiety. Perhaps there is unexpected lightness. The task is not to analyze it immediately, but to notice it. Judgment creates contraction. The body tightens, the breath becomes shallow, and the mind starts constructing stories. If you wake up feeling heavy and instantly tell yourself that you have no reason to feel this way, you create an internal conflict. One part of you is experiencing something real, while another part is dismissing it. This internal split drains energy. It also prevents understanding. When feelings are pushed away, they do not disappear. They simply move into the background and influence your behavior indirectly. Non-judgmental awareness, on the other hand, creates space. When you allow a feeling to exist without trying to fix it, the nervous system registers safety. Emotions are waves of physiological energy. They rise, peak, and fall when they are not resisted. It is often the resistance that prolongs them. By meeting your inner state with acceptance, you reduce the secondary layer of shame or frustration that intensifies distress. This does not mean indulging every emotion or allowing it to dictate your actions. It means acknowledging its presence before choosing how to respond. There is a difference between feeling anger and acting it out impulsively. When you pause and notice, I am feeling anger, you create a gap between experience and reaction. In that gap lies choice. For many people, the most challenging part of this practice is tolerating vulnerability. To admit, even privately, that you feel insecure, lonely, or overwhelmed can feel exposing. Yet avoidance often leads to compensatory behaviors such as overworking, pleasing others, or seeking distraction. A brief, honest check-in interrupts that cycle. It reminds you that emotions are information, not verdicts about your worth. Over time, practicing non-judgmental self-awareness strengthens internal trust. You begin to see that you can handle uncomfortable feelings without collapsing or escaping. The relationship with yourself softens. Instead of being a harsh supervisor monitoring performance, you become an attentive witness to your own experience. This shift may appear subtle, but it transforms how you move through the world. When you stop fighting your inner reality, you free up energy that was once spent on suppression. Clarity increases because you are no longer clouded by denial. And from that clarity, responses become more grounded, more authentic, and less driven by unconscious emotional currents. To identify your authentic daily need requires a kind of honesty that many people were never encouraged to practice. From an early age, you may have learned to prioritize what was expected of you over what you genuinely felt. Approval, belonging, and safety often depended on attunement to others. Over time, this outward focus can become so automatic that the question of what you need feels unfamiliar, even uncomfortable. Yet beneath the roles you play and the responsibilities you carry, there is a living organism with rhythms, limits, and signals. Your body and mind are constantly communicating. Fatigue, irritability, restlessness, and even procrastination can be indirect expressions of unmet needs. When these signals are ignored, they tend to intensify. What begins as a quiet request for rest can become burnout. What begins as a subtle discomfort in a relationship can become resentment. Identifying your authentic need does not mean indulging every preference or avoiding necessary challenges. It means discerning the difference between growth and self-abandonment. Growth may feel uncomfortable, but it is aligned with your deeper values. Self-abandonment feels depleting and disconnected, even if it earns praise. The distinction often becomes clearer when you pause long enough to sense your internal response rather than rushing to meet external demands. A simple way to begin is by asking yourself, what would support my well-being today? The answer might be surprisingly modest. Perhaps you need 10 minutes of quiet before engaging with others. Perhaps you need to set a boundary in a conversation that has been draining you. Perhaps you need movement, fresh air, or nourishment. At other times, your authentic need may be emotional rather than physical. You might need reassurance, expression, or acknowledgement of a grief you have been carrying silently. Many people override their needs because they fear being perceived as selfish or weak. This fear often has deep roots in past experiences where vulnerability was dismissed or punished. However, consistently ignoring your needs does not make you more generous. It makes you fragmented. When you operate from depletion, your patience thins and your capacity for genuine connection diminishes. Meeting your own needs responsibly is not self-centered, it is foundational to sustainable presence. There is also a subtle shift in agency that occurs when you identify and name what you need instead of moving through the day reactively. You begin with intention. If you recognize that you are already emotionally taxed, you may choose to structure your schedule differently or approach interactions with greater mindfulness. This awareness reduces the likelihood of unconscious reactions. It creates alignment between your inner state and your outward behavior. Authentic needs can change from day to day. Some mornings you may require focus and solitude. Other days you may need connection and support. The practice is not about finding a fixed formula, but about maintaining an ongoing dialogue with yourself. That dialogue builds trust. You learn that your signals are valid and worth listening to. Over time, honoring your daily needs strengthens self-respect. You become less dependent on external validation because your actions are rooted in internal clarity. Life does not necessarily become less demanding, but your participation in it becomes more conscious. You are no longer driven solely by habit, or expectation. Instead, you move from a place of attunement where your choices reflect an integrated awareness of what truly sustains you. Reactivity is often misunderstood as a personality flaw, something to be controlled through sheer willpower. In reality, it is a nervous system response that emerges when we feel threatened, unseen, or overwhelmed. The body moves into protection before the mind has time to reflect. Words are spoken sharply. Defenses rise quickly. Regret often follows. What appears as impatience or anger is frequently a sign of disconnection from oneself. Self-connection interrupts this pattern at its root. When you are connected to your internal state, you are more likely to notice subtle shifts before they escalate. You sense the tightening in your chest, the heat rising in your face, the quickening of your breath. These sensations are early signals that something meaningful is happening inside you. Without awareness, they propel you into automatic reaction. With awareness, they become information. Many reactive moments are fueled by old emotional imprints rather than present reality. A neutral comment from a colleague may trigger feelings of inadequacy formed years ago. A partner, as distraction may stir fears of abandonment that have little to do with the current situation. When you are disconnected from your inner world, you experience these reactions as if they are caused entirely by the external event. The past and present merge, and the response becomes disproportionate. Self-connection creates space between stimulus and response. When you regularly check in with yourself, you build familiarity with your emotional landscape. You begin to recognize recurring themes and sensitivities. This recognition does not eliminate triggers, but it softens their grip. Instead of saying, "You are disrespecting me," you may internally acknowledge, "I feel unappreciated right now." That subtle shift moves the focus from accusation to awareness. The body plays a central role in this process. Reactivity is embodied. Muscles contract, the jaw tightens, posture shifts. When you cultivate connection through breath awareness or simple pauses, you send signals of safety to your nervous system. The parasympathetic response engages, and the intensity of the reaction decreases. Clarity returns. You are no longer driven solely by instinctual defense. There is also an emotional honesty involved in self-connection. Rather than projecting discomfort outward, you take responsibility for your internal experience. This does not mean blaming yourself for everything, nor does it mean tolerating harmful behavior. It means recognizing that your reaction contains layers. When you understand those layers, your communication becomes more grounded. Boundaries can be expressed firmly without aggression. Disagreements can occur without escalation. Over time, practicing self-connection strengthens emotional resilience. You develop confidence in your ability to sit with discomfort without immediately acting on it. This capacity transforms relationships. Others feel less attacked and more understood. You feel less ashamed afterward because your responses are aligned with your values rather than impulsive surges. Reducing reactivity is not about suppressing emotion. Suppression often leads to delayed explosions or internal stress. Instead, it is about increasing awareness so that emotion flows through conscious choice rather than reflex. When you remain connected to yourself, you are less likely to be hijacked by momentary intensity. You become responsive rather than reactive, grounded rather than defensive, engaged rather than overwhelmed. Transformation is often imagined as a dramatic breakthrough, a sudden realization that permanently alters the course of one's life. While such moments can occur, lasting change is more commonly the result of repetition. The nervous system, the brain, and even our sense of identity are shaped not by intensity but by consistency. What you practice daily becomes what feels normal. What feels normal becomes who you believe you are. Many people begin new habits with enthusiasm, driven by inspiration or dissatisfaction. For a few days, sometimes weeks, they wake earlier, meditate, journal, or speak differently in relationships. But when the emotional surge fades, old patterns quietly return. This does not happen because of weakness. It happens because the brain is wired for efficiency. Familiar pathways require less energy. To create new ones, repetition is essential. Consistency signals safety and predictability to the nervous system. When you pause each morning to check in with yourself, even for a few minutes, you are teaching your body that awareness is not a threat. At first, sitting quietly with your emotions may feel uncomfortable. Restlessness, self-criticism, or impatience may arise. But when you return to the practice gently, without forcing or judging, the discomfort gradually softens. The brain begins to associate introspection with steadiness rather than danger. Small actions, performed regularly, accumulate power. 5 minutes of conscious breathing each day may seem insignificant, yet over months it alters your baseline state. Neural connections associated with regulation strengthen. Stress responses become less automatic. Similarly, choosing once a day to express a boundary respectfully reshapes how you see yourself. You move from identifying as someone who avoids conflict to someone capable of honest communication. Identity shifts through evidence gathered over time. Consistency also builds trust within yourself. When you repeatedly show up for your own well-being, you create an internal reliability. You begin to believe your intentions because you see them enacted. This self-trust reduces the need for external validation. Instead of seeking constant reassurance, you rely on the quiet knowledge that you are tending to your own growth. There will inevitably be days when motivation fades or life disrupts your routine. Consistency does not mean perfection. It means returning. The act of beginning again without harsh self-judgment is itself transformative. Each return reinforces resilience. Rather than interpreting a lapse as failure, you treat it as part of the process. This attitude prevents shame from derailing progress. Over time, what once required effort becomes integrated. The morning pause feels natural. The self-check-in becomes instinctive. Choosing responsiveness over reactivity requires less deliberation. Change that once seemed aspirational becomes embodied. Others may notice the difference before you do. They may comment on your steadiness or clarity, unaware that it is the product of countless quiet repetitions. Transformation through consistency is subtle but profound. It does not rely on dramatic declarations or external applause. It unfolds in ordinary moments when you choose awareness over avoidance, honesty over habit, presence over distraction. Each small, repeated act reinforces a new internal architecture. Gradually, without spectacle, the structure of your inner life reorganizes itself around stability and authenticity. And so the change you are searching for does not begin out there in achievement, in recognition, or in perfect circumstances. It begins in the quiet, often unnoticed moments when you choose to turn toward yourself instead of away. Each morning is an invitation to pause before reacting, to listen before performing, to ask what is true before accepting what is expected. These small acts may seem insignificant, but they accumulate. They reshape your nervous system. They restore your sense of agency. They reconnect you with the part of you that has always known what you need. You do not transform your life by force. You transform it by relationship. The relationship you cultivate with your own inner world. When that relationship becomes grounded in awareness and compassion, your choices shift naturally. Your boundaries become clearer. Your presence becomes steadier. Your reactions soften into responses. So tomorrow morning before the noise begins, pause, feel, ask, choose, and then repeat. Not because it is dramatic, but because it is faithful. And a life built on daily faithfulness to yourself is a life that quietly, steadily changes from the inside out.